Hello, my name is Karen Marshalsay and I'm a harper, a traditional musician from Scotland who happens to play the harp, or I should say several different harps. I have my gut-strung levered clarsach, it was made by Jack Yule, here with me today. I also play wire-strung harp, brace-strung harp, Paraguayan harp and pedal harp. And over these 7 weeks, I hope you're going to join me on this exploration of ornamentation techniques for harps. And if you do, you're going to see several of these different harps appearing throughout the videos. So what we're going to be looking at is techniques to play the decorations, the grace notes, the ornamentation that is such a key part of playing tunes in a traditional style. And in a traditional style in a way that's recognised by players of other traditional instruments, pipes and fiddles, etc. And for me as a traditional musician, that's really important. And I would highly recommend that you listen, not just to harp players as we go through these weeks, but also to pipers, fiddlers, traditional singers as well. My own background, as I said, I'm a traditional musician who plays harp. I play lever, wire, bray, Paraguayan and pedal. I started on a very small gut-strung harp. I don't have it anymore, I would show you it. 17 strings, it was made by Tim Hobra. I moved on to wire very quickly. Within a few months I had a small 19-string wire harp, so those 2 strings, you know, made a difference. I went travelling. I spent a year travelling around Australia mostly. I got very into Paraguayan harp. I built a Paraguayan style harp out in Australia. Came home, I got this gut-strung levered harp, clarsach, that was made by Jack Yule. And I've since moved into bray harp. I got a larger wire-strung harp, and latterly the most recent one I've moved into in the past 10 years or so has been pedal harp. So my background is that I also play whistle and flute. I did learn chanter, but I decided at the time I was learning both pipes and harp clarsach at the same time, and I decided to go with the clarsach, much to the relief of all the neighbours, I can assure you. I've mostly learned orally, and I've learned a lot from the playing of Alison Kinnaird in particular. She has a blue tutor book, which was my first harp tutor, and I would see Alison when I could for lessons, but also through the folk world. I would go to Fashion, I would go to workshops with different players. I later studied Paraguayan with Bill Morgan and Rito Pedersen, amongst others. I play solo. I do a solo series of concerts, which I started doing after I released my album, The Road to Cruinneagh, in July 2019, just in time for everything to be shutting down as tours were getting organised. The CD is called The Road to Cruinneagh, and I play all my harps on it apart from the pedal harp. I play the gut, the Scottish harps, the gut harp, the wire harp and the bray harp on that. And it's a set of traditional tunes and my own compositions in traditional style. I've also played with piper Alan MacDonald, and I play with Cathal McConnell, the legendary Irish flute player and singer and storyteller as well, one of the founders of Boys of the Loch. My album was actually produced by Robin Morton, who was Cathal's dual partner and other founder of that band. I taught clarsach at the National Centre of Excellence in Traditional Music up in Plockton for about 7 years, and I've also been wire and bray harp tutor at both the RSAMD and the RCS, as it is now, the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. And while I was doing all that teaching, I started developing ways of teaching the techniques, writing exercises, studies, teaching tunes. And a lot of these were published in a book called Key Techniques for Harp that I published in 2012. So this series of videos will have all new material. It's not going to go in as much depth as Key Techniques. I'm only going to pick my favourites, I suppose. There's a greater range in the book if you're interested in that. But it's going to follow the same format, except it's on video. I'm going to demonstrate the techniques, teach you how to play them, give you little exercises, little teaching tunes, and then we'll work up to arrangements. We'll start off doing 1 or 2 techniques at a time, and we'll gradually start mixing them all up. So it's The material in the video is different. The techniques might be the same, but the supporting material is going to be different. I will be producing an accompanying PDF download to these videos each week. I realise that not everyone who's interested in this topic will be happy learning by ear, or you might want the arrangements or the exercises just actually in a piece of paper in front of you. That's totally fine. I'll put in the description down below the video where you can download these. This week they'll be free to download so that you can all get a flavour of it, and then in the following weeks there'll be a small charge just to help me cover my time and expenses in doing this, and I would be grateful for your support if you wish to get the PDFs. So there's going to be 7 weeks of this. This is the first one, and I'll tell you what we're going to do this week shortly. Next week we're going to look at two of my favourite techniques, the beat and the little finger plait, particularly for playing bills or triplets or thistles, I've heard some people call them. The next week we're going to look more deeply into that and ways of playing what I call bis plaits. Triplets and birls will abound in week 3. In week 4 we're going to look at what I call plaits and piping style, so 4-finger plaits, little finger plaits, that sort of thing. Week 5 is probably my favourite thing to do, which I call gurglies. It's a two-handed composite decoration technique that I originally learned from Alison Kinnaird, and she explains the basics. She explains it in her small harp tutor, and it's something that I've worked with and developed in my own repertoire and playing a lot over the years. Week 6 we're going to look at variations and how you might use all these different ornamentation techniques to create perhaps take a very simple tune and write a series of variations for it. And the last week, which will be the roundup week, week 7, we're going to look at all of these, quick review, and also looking at using them in other genres, looking at how you might want to use them if you're playing some Mozart or some classical music, if you're playing pop or country or contemporary or jazz or anything you play. These are not just techniques for traditional music, they're not just techniques for traditional harps or wire strung harps or lighter strung harps. These can be used on any harp. I've got some clips later on of me using some of these on the pedal harp as well. So I hope you're going to join me in these 7 weeks. It's looking forward to this exploration of ornamentation on harp. So week 1, we know what we're looking at. We're looking at ornamentation. We're looking at it because it's an incredibly important part of playing traditional music. In traditional style, the tune is the most important thing. Then you want to start ornamenting the tune, deciding when and where and how to put these decorations in. And those are important questions that we will be looking at throughout the series. And then you think about a bit of other support that your left hand might be doing. And all this is happening before I start thinking about adding harmony into a tune. All of this is arising out of the tune. And that's something that's really important that we're going to come back to at various points over these 7 weeks. The harping tradition died out in Scotland, which, you know, it is a broken tradition. We don't have the lineages going back the way pipers and fiddlers do. They're starting up. It is starting up as you start getting younger players coming through that you've taught, and then there's people who've taught me, and there's people I've taught, and there's people they've taught. So the lineages are perhaps starting up. But I find it's a very exciting and creative thing to do, to explore style and traditional style on the harps, because we have this freedom of the broken tradition. What we really need to do is listen to other players, other fiddle players, pipe players, traditional singers, remember, not just harp players. Explore the sounds, experiment with what we want to do. And there's 2 crucial things. First, of course, is how to do the ornamentation. What are the techniques? How to play them? How to get the sound you want? That's what I'm going to be looking at in these workshops. And then there's when to ornament. And you really do need to listen to other players to get the idea of what is stylistically good, when is it too much, etc. And what is the style? So we're going to be talking about that a lot. I'll be going through the techniques, I'll do little exercises, scales, what I call teaching tunes. We'll look at them in simple tunes, and we'll also do arrangements of tunes as well. So let's get started. One of the most common things is what I call cuts, and quite a lot of players call these cuts. You do need to realise that terminology is not standardised at all, I'm afraid. You get different terms in Scotland and in Ireland, different terms being used by pipers or fiddlers, and there is a bit of a push in the harp world as well to try and standardise all this, you know, with exams and all sorts of things. I think you just kind of need to go with the flow, really. Use your ears and decide what sounds good. It doesn't really matter what you call it if it's giving you the sound that you want. Some of the proposed names don't always make a great deal of sense to me, so I'm just going to use what I call them. So cuts, they come from the piping tradition. You're cutting into a continuous airflow. Pipes, you can't play repeated notes. You can't tongue the way you can on a flute or other wind instruments. So the only way to play repeated notes, for example, is to do a cut into that airflow. And pipers do it by lifting a finger up. So on the pipes, you just have to imagine that this lovely John Swain wooden whistle is actually a chanter. What you have is a continual airflow. You can't do the nice, you can't do that tonguing, although it sounds particularly nice, but you certainly can't do it on bagpipes. So you need to do something else for repeated notes. You can't do 2 Gs. You just get one sound. So you lift a finger or tap a finger down. And that cutting into the stream of air is what you get. So you're basically lifting a finger. One little note to think about is that if you see written pipe music, well, there's 2 things. One is, remember that the key signature for the harps, if of written pipe music, you need to go into a D signature. So put your levers into D. So often there's that flat and 7th, really, you're kind of playing around A. But the tuning would be a D tuning. So even if there's no key signature written in the music, that's what you need to go for. That's the first thing. The second thing is when you look at the music, you've got a whole flurry of little grace notes. Be careful of falling into the harpy trap of trying to finger all those notes, a G and a D and an E and all those things. Don't try and play all those strings. What pipers are doing, remember, is lifting a finger. So they're lifting a G finger, a D finger, an E finger, etc. And they're getting that burble. It's a rhythmic effect, and that's what you really want to be going for. So that's where the name comes from, and we can talk a little bit more about how these are used, but let's just look at what they are on a harp. So basically you're going to cut down or you're going to cut up. The easiest thing to do is just to repeat a note you've already played. That's the tune note, and I'm going to play it again on the way to this note here. Instead of just going C, B, I'm doing C, C, B. So that little grace note, the cut, is lighter, quicker, faster, and it's always going somewhere. Grace notes are always taking you somewhere, they're leading you somewhere. When I write out the music, and you'll see that if you get the PDFs, I put a little slur from the grace note to the note that it's taking you to. So you can practice these very, very simply. Instead of just doing scales, you can do something like that. Play this scale note, play it again on the way to the next one. Play the scale note, play it again on the way to the next one, and so on. we've done was basically but we've decorated it. So let's look at another little exercise. So we're going to do 2-1, come up 2-1, cut down from the top note. Your third finger goes to the next one below. So I'm doing C, D, cut D, C. As I play the third one, my thumb's going to go to that C. So you can start creating all sorts of little exercises for yourself with these. So that's cutting down. You don't need to stay on adjacent strings either. Create little exercises for yourself. If you're going in the other direction, then it's a cut up. Instead of cut down, I talk about a cut up. And it's exactly the same thing to think about. In this instance, we're playing the melody note or the scale note and then repeating it to take us to another note. So something like that is a good little exercise. So we're a third apart, going to the middle note, thumb is now landing, so we've done C, E, D, thumb goes to F, and I'm going to cut up from the D to the F. You have to stop somewhere. You could go all the way up and down the harp, but try and make some sort of little musical ending. So I would really encourage you to create little exercises for yourself. The cut up in particular, you can get into a nice, very piping style of. You don't always need to be on adjacent or even particularly close strings. The fifth sounds good. So that's just the melody note cutting up to the next one. Choose a low note. Etc. Create these little exercises for yourself. Okay, so once you've got the technique into your fingers and you've practiced it on some scales and some little exercises, maybe created some little exercises for yourself, there's two more things you can have a look at doing. Try and find a nice, simple but beautiful tune, a tune that's going to grab you melodically. Something like bàta is a good one. You can make your practice quite meditative almost with these sort of tunes. a traditional Gaelic song, the boat will come. And it's quite sad actually, because the girl knows she's going to drown, but the boat will come, and brothers and her father and people will be in it, and they'll recognise her floating in the waves. Bàta, Hugo. It's a walking song originally. And what you can do is you can take the techniques that you've learned. So up to this point we've learned cuts. And as an exercise, both in learning to play and to play the cuts fluently, and also in training your ear as to where you think the cuts go best, always listen to what you're doing when you're doing these exercises. Try putting them in all over the place. So you can try that. That's just 2 melody notes and then a cut onto the B. Now if you're actually playing the tune, that would probably be enough at that point. And let these 2 notes ring out. You might do something like that, but for the purposes of the exercise, we're going to look at all the places we could put them in. Cut down there. That would be a little bit too much, I think. But it just doesn't seem to flow terribly well to my ears, so. You could cut down here over the 4th. We're going to talk about the harmonic effects that you get in a little bit when you do these cuts and grace notes over particular intervals. So. So here I cut up here, I added a little bit of interest. So I'm building it there, I'm adding a few more in. Something along those lines. So that's Thig and bàta. You could practice that with the cuts. There's another tune. We're going to go into D, just over the melody part at the minute. This is cruinneagh, Gown and Bone. It's from the Gesto Collection. Second part. And I think that would be a lovely tune to experiment with where you might want to put some of these cuts in. Something like that, for example. I'll put that on the PDF for you. So that's the sort of thing that we're going to be looking at over the next few weeks. This is the style that we're going to be having. But there's something that we need to think about right from the offset on harps. Harp's ring. Don't know if you can still hear it, but That's all still ringing out. Forgot what's gone into D there. So it's kind of the best and the worst of harp, if you like. This ringing nature is the defining characteristic of the harp, really. The strings, they ring out. Cuts can make a tune flow better. For example, you often don't really need to change your fingering as much. You do sometimes, depending on where you've put them, so you can get a lovely flow. But which note you choose to play as the cut is going to be left ringing. And that really adds to the shimmering effect. And that is how you might want to start thinking about building harmony, if you want to use that term, out of the tune. I generally would only really use tune notes that appear in the tunes to decorate them. It's not an absolute rule, there's always exceptions, but as a general principle, that's a really good first step to think about. And remember I spoke about cutting over an interval. You've now starting to get intervals, thirds, fourths and fifths all ringing out. And it's these intervals that make chords and chords that make harmony. So you really need to think carefully about what notes you add in, and if you choose them well, you'll get a gorgeous effect. But the thing is, the harp is the only instrument that does this in traditional music. Pipes, fiddles, solo voice, as soon as they've played that grace note and they move on to the tune note, the grace note's not heard anymore. It's cut off, it's not played. Those instruments have control of the length of the note. All we can actually do is play it and stop it. We don't have control once our fingers are off the strings unless we actually just want to return and shut it off and stop it. So there's another way of playing a lot of these things, and you might hear the term the stopped style that's sometimes used. And in that, if you're going to play in what they call the stopped style, you're stopping the grace notes. It's a way of playing really cleanly, concisely. It's a much cleaner and closer emulation of what fiddles and pipes are doing, is to get rid of some of these grace notes. I know in my own experience, pipers in particular really react well to that way of playing. They often talk about it being that's really clean sounding. It doesn't have all this muddy ringing going on. So we're going to look at a couple of these techniques to stop that grace note. And these come from the Robert ap Hugh manuscript, which is also something we're going to explore a little bit over these few weeks. So the first one, where we were cutting down, we're going to experiment with what's called a thumb choke. So if you put your second finger on the D and your third finger on the C, no thumb on the strings, the thumb's going to go to work in a minute. You're going to play your second finger, that's the grace note, and you're going to place your thumb on it to damp it out at the same moment as you play the C with your third. Doesn't sound very exciting yet, but when these techniques are new to you, especially if the fingering's a little bit unusual or different for you, you do need to practice them slowly so that you get the control. And you can build up the speed to get the grace note leading to the tune note. You can hear the difference. It is a very different effect that you get. So, again, same thing, you can practice it in scales. You can create little exercise phrases for yourself. can spend hours like that. I thoroughly encourage you to spend hours just faffing around on your harp learning these techniques. So a thumb choke 2 and 3 if it's on adjacent strings. If you're going to go over wider intervals, I would use 2 and 4, and that would be referred to as a forked choke because you're making this forked movement, gesture with your fingers. You might, again, terminology, you might hear these referred to as fingering gestures, fingering movements. No standard terminology, remember. So, just create little scales. Obviously these are going to be not on adjacent strings. You could do a thumb choke. Mixing between the thumb choke and the fork choke. To go up the way, I'm going to play a thing called a short plait. So we're going to start at the bottom. This time, third finger's on the C, second finger is on the D. You're going to come up, and your fourth finger is going to go on to damp the string that's being played as your second finger plays at this time. Again, it's not very exciting until you get it really flowing. You can hear that they're quite clipped, and it is much closer, I think, in effect to what the pipers are doing when they're not actually fully sounding a G, D and E, for example. They're just giving a little burble. It's a rhythmic effect. So, you can go up that way, you can go down. So that's a thumb choke, a fork choke and a short plait. There's one other that I'm going to fling at you this week. So you've got 4 of these. I hope we're going to spend a bit of time playing about with them during the week, and we're going to move on to new things next week. But if you get these under your fingers, it'll be really useful when we start mixing the different techniques into pieces in a more real life situation. You wouldn't always play just the one type of decoration unless you're doing that as a point and you're making it a series of variations. So this one is fun, and it's called a half scratch. So this time we're going to play 3 and 4. We've got them in E and D here. You're going to play the E with your third, and you're going to slide your fourth finger up. So it is another descending one. The notes are going down, but you've got this little sliding action. I think it sounds different to the thumb choke. And I'll use it at different times. Sometimes it just is where my hand lies on the strings, where it's coming from, where it's going to. Sometimes it's for a particular sound that I'm looking for. So hopefully you're going to practice some of these up and put them in a little bit of a tune as well. Thig and bàta, that first one. We were playing them all with cuts and they were all ringing out. Experiment with where you want to put in some of these stopped style fingering gestures. Instead of just having that cut there, do a thumb choke, short plait. We can do it again. Short plait, short plait. Thumb choke. You can come up from the bottom there if you like as a short plait. If you wanted to add a little bit more harmony into this, mix and match both styles. And of course the beauty of the harp having both of these possibilities is that we can do them both. We can do them both in the same tune, in the same piece of music. Ornamentation is a personal expression within the tradition, but it is a personal expression. It's an expression of how you're feeling at that moment as well. What parts of the tune is it that you want to express, you want to highlight, you want to emphasize somehow? Where are you feeling those notes? Sometimes you might be feeling that you want that ringing out. Especially over something like that fourth, still ringing as we're talking. I might want to stop them off the second time, just that subtle difference when you're playing traditional tunes and you're arranging tunes as well, that really subtle differences. Maybe the second time round the tune or on the repeat or something really make a difference. And you can add them both in. So we've cut down, cut, and then a short plait up. And we reversed it there. So that's something that you can really, I hope, experiment with and have fun with. So I'm going to leave you with one other thing. It's just one of these little teaching phrases. So I'm going to teach you this. It's the first phrase. It's the second phrase, I'll do it again. Phrase. Nice little ending. So it's got the feel of a sort of a song and an air, I think, to me, but it's just a little set of phrases that I've put together to practice these. So remember the first one. Cups in there. Second phrase was straight, down and back to the A. So we're going to cut here again. The third phrase went cut up this time from the B to the C. Phrase, we're going to add in cuts. Practicing it with cuts. Do a short plait there if you like. Slightly awkward if you're not used to doing these. you find that your hand does come off the harp a little bit more often, but it's just part of playing these techniques. Don't let that put you off. We had a cut here. And add a little sharp plat in at the end. We had a cut there. Sharp plat would be really clean. And then you could just let that ring out, say cut from the A down to the E. You could cut up from the bottom. You could do it that way, G to C. You could maybe just do B to C. If you're cutting it off really quickly, it's not as important exactly which note you choose. Okay, so some nice clean close-ups. To cut down, you're repeating the melody note that you've just played on the way to another one. It's quicker, faster, lighter. Doesn't need to be adjacent strings. Doesn't always need to be a melody note that you've just played. You can choose for the harmony, remember. Something like that. It doesn't always need to be a note that you've immediately played, but that's the first way of approaching them. It's good to do that. We'll talk a little bit more about the other ways later. And you can cut up the way. Cut up from the G to the C there. So, close up of that. Same idea. Melody or scale here. Nice and strong. A very light, quick grace note that's taking you somewhere. Etc. Again, doesn't need to be adjacent strings. Etc. Cutting up, cutting down. So for a thumb choke, you have 2 and 3. 2 on the higher string, 3 on the lower. You play 2, place your thumb on it as you play 3. Remember to practice all these slowly, steadily, and eventually you can turn it into that grace note. To go up the way, we have a short plat. So this time 3 and 2. So it's actually the same starting position. But 3 is going to play the lower string, 4 is going to come on it to damp, 2 is going to play the upper string. And the rest of your hand's just tucked loosely but neatly out the way. So you can go down, come up. You can play a thumb choke over a wider interval and it turns into a forked choke. So 2 and 4. Same principle though. Upper note, thumb damps it, lower note. You could practice it something like that. And the last one we've looked at this week is the half scratch. So remember, 3 and 4, 3 on the higher string plays, 4 is going to slide, plays the lower note, damps that upper note. Remember, it is a descending pattern. Okay, so just another little tune, teaching tune to fling at you, because I suddenly realised, well, there are still quite a lot of Easter eggs about this flat, and I taught this at a workshop one Easter Sunday it was one year, called cruinneagh, or Easter eggs, eggs of Easter, cruinneagh. And the idea was that I love the idea of the Easter egg being something that's kind of hidden that you have to go and find as well. So you can play it with two hands. That's the first part. So lovely simple tune. You can take, one of the things we're going to look at in these next few weeks as well is going to be a more coupled hands approach, where you take some of the tune notes with your bass hand. So we're going to do this in this little tune, cruinneagh. I'm going to take the first note, the G, with our left hand, come down, take it with the left again. This is the A part. To the D. It's really the only change. Same ending. As I said, lovely simple tune, Easter eggs, cruinneagh. What you can now do is, now you decorate your egg. You see? Told you it was an Easter Sunday workshop. So we could have a look at some of these cuts to decorate our Easter eggs. We could do that. So that was cutting down, down here the B to the A, so that we're putting it in a different place. Different place again. We're going to cut up. So just repeat it straight. You could do it slightly differently the second time round if you wanted to. Or you could do it the first time round with cuts, the second time with some of these stopped gestures. Thumb choke. You could do a short plait over that interval there if you like. I did keep the thumb choke in the same place there, just to keep it nice and steady for you to learn this new movement. You could do that. So if we put them together, we have the cuts. It's good to just really get used to the different sounds and really pay attention to what you like on the harp as you're playing these exercises. Another great thing you can do with these simple tunes is make them even simpler. And you could actually just take a skeleton of the tune. And you could add in all the gestures that you've been learning so far. And you could take this tune with you throughout all the weeks. Cutting up. down. Just experiment. Where can you put these? Where can you put these in? And this is a great one for future weeks when we do things like the or these plaits, beats, these sort of things. So, cruinneagh, at least an egg for you. Play around with it. Just be conscious, make a conscious decision so that you're in control of when the grace notes appear. They're not just happening randomly. You have to be in control. Intention is a really good phrase to think about. What is your intention? The music's got to start in here. The music's got to start inside you and in your head, and you've got to transmit that, communicate that to your listeners. So what is your intention when you're playing this? Be in control, but don't be too fixedly in control. Have a little bit of fluidity as well is very much prized. Not always playing the same grace notes in the same place every single time, because then it just becomes a composed piece. And if I hear a harp player playing a traditional tune, for example, and they're playing their arrangement the exact same way every single time with the same grace notes in the same place, it becomes something else. It just becomes a harp piece or a harp composition. It's not really a traditional style of playing. So hopefully you can have fun with these. Just one more thing I want to drop in this initial introductory session, especially when we're looking at cuts. I'm playing these before the beat, so the beat is landing on the tune note. Dee brum ba dee ba da brum ba, that sort of idea. So if you're knowledgeable about Baroque music or written classical music in particular time periods, etc., you will be aware that appoggiaturas were played differently from acicaturas, and that's something that we'll look a little bit about, we'll touch on briefly, particularly when you're looking for tunes from older collections. But at the minute, just to say, I'm playing these cuts, they're all before the beat and the tune notes are coming on heavily on the beat. So this is the book I mentioned earlier, Key Techniques for Harp, the one that came out in 2012, I think. I might need to check that, 2012. So you can see that it has a lot of these techniques, a whole pile of them, many more than we're going to do in these 7 weeks. And they start off with a little explanation. Here's the thumb choke, for example, an explanation, some scales, some exercises. You gradually start getting little studies and things. It has several of them in. So if you want more of what we're doing, then this would be a good move. The books themselves are out of print, but you can get downloadable PDFs from the website. So I'll stick that link down below as well. Slum cruinneagh gawn an bó. Thig and bàta, Google. bit more realistic, if you like, as to how I might play these in performance. This is a tune that I wrote for my mum, actually, and it's called Isabel Gow's Welcome to Edinburgh, and I've written it as a pipe march, and there's quite a lot of cuts in it, and you get an idea of how these cuts can help a tune flow. So there you go. Thank you.